The day the transfer girl walked into Jefferson High, the air shifted like a storm waiting to break. It was the kind of Monday morning where students dragged their feet, half awake, eyes glued to their phones. But when the principal stepped into the hallway with her, whispers started buzzing like electricity through the corridors. She was tall but not intimidating, slim but carried herself like she didn't belong in the chaos of high school noise. Her dark hair was tied in a neat ponytail, her uniform crisp, her eyes sharp yet strangely calm. It wasn't the kind of calm that came from shyness. It was deeper, like someone who had seen storms before and wasn't fazed by thunder anymore. Her name, as the principal introduced, was Aria. Students leaned against lockers chewing gum, laughing, already labeling her before she could even speak. Transfer students rarely had it easy, and Jefferson High was no exception. Here, reputations were built on intimidation, and the so-called kings of the hall, the bullies, decided who got to breathe freely and who didn't. Among them was Cole, a broad-shouldered senior with a cruel smirk that never left his face, and his friends Marcus and Dean, shadows who echoed his cruelty. They had built their empire on fear, and a new face was simply fresh prey. Arya walked silently, her steps steady. When the teacher led her into homeroom, she stood before rows of staring eyes. Some students giggled, some sneered, others whispered rumors already forming. The teacher asked her to introduce herself, but she only gave a small bow of her head and said softly, "Arya." That was it. No extra words, no explanation of where she came from, no attempt to win favor. The silence after her voice was heavy, awkward, and Cole smirked in the back row. He had decided already. This quiet girl was going to be his entertainment. The first half of the day passed uneventfully, but tension brewed like a kettle on the verge of boiling. By lunch, Arya sat alone at a corner table, unpacking a small meal from home while laughter filled the cafeteria around her. She didn't look lonely. She looked focused, as though solitude was her natural state. That unsettled some students more than if she had looked broken. Cole, leaning back with his arms draped across his chair, caught sight of her and nudged Marcus. "Look at her. Thinks she's too good for everyone. We'll fix that." They moved like vultures circling prey, swaggering toward her table. Conversations around them hushed. Students knew what was coming. Cole slammed his hand down on Arya's table, making her chopsticks clatter against her tray. She lifted her gaze unshaken, her eyes meeting his with quiet steel. That only irritated him further. "So, transfer girl," he sneered, "you think you're better than us? Sitting here all prim and proper. Where you from, huh? Fancy school?" Arya didn't answer. She simply placed another bite of food in her mouth, chewing slowly. The audacity of her silence spread a murmur through the cafeteria. Cole leaned closer, his grin dangerous now. "I asked you a question." Still, she said nothing. Marcus laughed, grabbing her chopsticks and snapping them in half. Dean snatched her lunch, tossing it to the floor. The sound of rice scattering across the tiles was like an insult echoing in the air. Finally, Arya stood. She wasn't angry. She wasn't flustered. She simply rose tall and composed, her gaze sweeping over the three boys. The cafeteria was breathless, waiting. Cole stepped forward, grabbing her collar in a sudden jerk that made the crowd gasp. He yanked her close, his face inches from hers. "You think ignoring me makes you strong," he growled. "You're nothing here. Nothing." But Arya's eyes, they didn't show fear. They didn't show submission. They held something else, something that made a shiver crawl across the skin of anyone who noticed closely enough. It was the kind of look soldiers carried when they'd seen too much. It was the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. She spoke then, her voice low, steady, almost chilling in its control. "Let go." The Cole blinked, taken aback for just a fraction of a second. That pause was enough to ripple unease through his crew. But he tightened his grip, smirking again, determined to prove dominance. Or what? And that was when it happened. In one smooth, calculated movement, Arya's hand snapped up, gripping his wrist with a precision that didn't belong to an ordinary girl. With a twist so subtle yet controlled, Cole's smugness cracked into a grimace of pain. The cafeteria erupted into gasps. Dean moved forward, but Arya's stance shifted, not wild, not desperate, but exact, like she had trained every muscle to respond with perfect efficiency. She wasn't lashing out, she was demonstrating. Cole stumbled back as she released him, his wrist throbbing, his ego shattered. Arya's voice cut through the stunned silence. "I said let go." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The cafeteria was frozen in awe and disbelief. Cole, clutching his wrist, glared at her with a mixture of rage and confusion. No one had ever stood against him, not like this, not with such control. Students whispered frantically now, words like martial arts, fighter, dangerous. Arya simply collected her bag, walked past them without a second glance, and left the cafeteria. The bullies stood there, humiliated, their reputations cracked in front of everyone. Cole's jaw tightened. This isn't over, he muttered under his breath. But deep down, even he knew, this transfer girl carried a secret, a power, a discipline that none of them had seen coming. And that was only the beginning.